Well, surprise, surprise, surprise. It's Tuesday. It's break on through. But it's not Jeff Clayton. What the hell's going on here? Where's JC, man? Where is he? Where's the unimpeachable president for life? WTF. It's Tuesday. It's 5 o'clock, man. You can set your calendar by it. You know that Tuesday at 5 means it's time to break on through, baby. And that means it's time to break on through whether or not the Clayton White House has electricity in the broadcast room. Yes, problems at the Jeff Clayton White House. Yes, there's been some work on the domicile at Clayton Manor, and the unimpeachable president for life is without power today. So he got on the red telephone, the hotline, and dialed the Minister of Propaganda direct and said, "Minister of Propaganda, today you must propagandize in my place." So I, of course, said, "Yes, sir, sir, yes, sir. I am here to serve, sir." So I'm here serving all of you, the educated ANTiSEEN fans and, let's see, educated consumers. There you go. Because the goal is to consume. Ha! And we're going to do that right now today. As well know, the heel Prez has been talking about professional wrestling for the past couple of weeks. And if there's one thing that the members of ANTiSEEN do agree on, it's the greatness of the sport of professional wrestling. And I'm going to talk about that today from my own unique perspective. But first, I got a couple of announcements. We need to send some information out to all of you people. Announcement number one. Announcement number one relates to the latest, yea, perhaps even greatest, ANTiSEEN product in the offing. And that is, of course, the Live from Quarantine LP. Available on 3 stunning colors. Featuring, for the first time ever, on the front cover of an ANTiSEEN album, look at that! The Minister of Propaganda himself. Oh man! Standing shoulder to shoulder, side by side, belly to back, gut to gut, with the members of ANTiSEEN. This album is, for all intents and purposes, just about sold out. We, the ANTiSEEN corporate entity, have no more copies left to sell. We are out like stout. There are no more Quarantine albums to be had through ANTiSEEN.com. The good news is that TKO Records still has a few. Not many. TKO is down to its last 20 or so copies of each color, I'm told. So if you want to get them, you got to move now, but you got to move over to TKO and get them. Because once they're gone, baby. Personally, I don't care. I got mine. I had to pay only the most minimal price for them, too. But I got them, baby. They're mine. Mine. So don't be left out in the cold, man. Don't miss the boat. Be like me, Malcolm Tent, the Minister of Propaganda for ANTiSEEN, and be sure that you get yours. Speaking of getting yours, we've been getting a couple of complaints here and there. Some people have noticed that if they try to order stuff from the ANTiSEEN website and also from the Janice Blythe page, or I should say, I don't know if it's the page or the website. I'm not really in charge of that. I think it's the website and the page. But there have been difficulties with people trying to order things using their cell phones. And there's some kind of a glitch with the mobile app on the PayPal end, which is not allowing the transactions to go through. So if you want to order something from ANTiSEEN or Janice Blythe, do so with either a tablet or with your desktop, just not your telephone. There's something going on. We've got our research team looking into it. There's an angry vigilante mob with torches storming PayPal, even as we speak, demanding answers to know why they're glitching and why they're screwing us up. And there will be answers. But until then, yes, please keep ordering. Don't stop, but make sure you do it with either your desktop or a tablet. Phone orders will be enabled sooner than later. That's another thing crossed off the list. Done. Got one more thing I'd like to tell you all about before I start getting into the noble sport of professional wrestling. As I hydrate with some of this fine, fine Danbury tap water. Little dab will do you. I've been authorized by the heel prez himself to occasionally drop in a little plug for my record label, TPOS. You might think that was the plug. No, this is simply letting you know why I'm about to tell you about this. TPOS released a lot of ANTiSEEN stuff. I got another thing coming up. This is not officially out yet, but it will be very, very soon. The last broadcast that we did with ANTiSEEN, the Halloween Quarantine, which, by the way, is on the official ANTiSEEN YouTube channel, which you have not, if you have not yet subscribed to the official ANTiSEEN YouTube channel, you need to get with it, Jack. You cannot be a lollygagger. You got to be on top. You got to be in the swim. You need to be on YouTube, baby. Subscribe to our channel so you can watch the ANTiSEEN Halloween Quarantine broadcast and not miss anything. We have plenty of past episodes of Break On Through archived there. Shoot interviews hosted by me. Favorite videos of ourselves. A channel about our friends and fans and allies and influences. There's a lot of video content to be had there on the ANTiSEEN YouTube channel, so do yourself a favor and subscribe. Anyway, when we did the Halloween Quarantine back in October, Mad Brother Ward and I found ourselves with a little bit of time off. And personally, I don't do well with time off. I'm not very good at sitting around being idle. I've got to do things, baby. I've got to work. I'm highly motivated. So I said, Ward, let's make some noise. Let's just plug in and make some noise, and let's create a noise thing. And Mad Brother Ward and I are on the same page with a few things, and one of them is noise. We love noise and sound sculpture and feedback, you know, noise for the sake of noise. Get it? So we cut a noise session, dueling bass and guitar feedback and sound sculpture and textures. It was louder than hell. It sounded great. I recorded the whole thing, brought the recordings back to TPOS Laboratories, which you can't see, but the lab is back behind my beautiful backdrop here. And I came up with a 60-minute cassette that looks a lot like this. The Malcolm Tent Power Duo featuring Mad Brother Ward, and it's called Sonic Sauna. If you look at the disclaimer on the back, caution, there is no rock and roll on this cassette. No rock and roll. Just an hour of the sound of myself and Mad Brother Ward cutting each other up with squalls of pure sound waves. So keep an eye open for this on the fabulous TPOS label, which is of course on Discogs and eBay. Or write me directly, Malcolm Tent, the Minister of Propaganda for ANTiSEEN, through my personal page on Facebook or on YouTube. And we'll get some hooking up going with this. I drink to pure noise. Noise, baby! All right, that takes care of the bulletin board. Let's talk about wrestling. I was talking to Phil Keller a little while ago, former drummer for ANTiSEEN, and he made an observation which I thought was quite valid. He said, maybe it might be possible to be a member of ANTiSEEN without being into professional wrestling, but not very likely. Okay? As Jeff Clayton himself has said, we don't, like the 4 individual members of ANTiSEEN, don't see eye to eye on every single thing. You know, there are differences. You know, there are disagreements. There are opinions that differ and diverge. But when it comes to wrestling, we are straight down the middle of the road, baby. Walking a fine line. And it is a fine line. Because we all know, every single one of us, that there is only one sport that matters. Professional wrestling. And listening to Jeff's tales of how he got into wrestling, it was fascinating. I loved it because it kind of sort of paralleled my discovery of the sport and my path of fandom through professional wrestling. Now, Jeff he's 1 year older than I am. And listening to his tale, I think he discovered wrestling probably a year or 2 before I did. Excuse me. My very earliest memories of professional wrestling were Sundays at my grandparents' house. And before I continue on any longer, I just want to make sure that everybody's tuned in. I'm going to give the Masked Mac truck here some screen time while I scroll down to make sure that we are indeed still live. All right, okay, we're on. We're live. That's good. I remember professional wrestling from my grandparents' house. Now, my granddad was a lay leader in the Methodist Church. He was a lay leader at Opelika United Methodist Church in Florida. And my grandma was the church treasurer. So every Sunday morning, that meant we went to church. And I, as the 4 or 5 year old, whatever I was, would, go to church, suffer through church, and then suffer through grandma having to count out the donation receipts and granddad taking care of whatever he had to take care of and all that. And just wait and wait and wait until finally it was time to go home or go to grandma and granddad's house for supper, for Sunday supper. And we'd gather around the table and have supper, and we'd be sitting at the dining room table, and there was another table over to the left where there was a small black and white TV. And on that black and white TV, every Sunday was wrestling. Championship wrestling from Florida. And my grandma, the church treasurer, the wife of the lay leader of the church, would be sitting there. She always sat right next to the TV. So it'd be there and she's here. And the wrestling would be on this black and white TV, and she'd be eating, and Boris Malenko would be beating somebody up, and she'd be like, "Oh, you go get him. You can't let him do that. You stupid referee, didn't you see that? Oh, don't let him do that. You can't." And she was freaking out, man. My grandma, who'd been in church 2 hours earlier, was now like foaming at the mouth, ready to kill the great Malenko, or, whoever the bad guy was. I was so young, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know who these people were. I didn't know what it was. I thought it was kind of gross, actually. I remember seeing midgets on the TV. And I thought it was weird, these midgets fighting in a ring. It was just kind of weird and kind of gross. And it was just really odd that my grandma, this is my grandmother, my beloved gray-haired grandmother, sitting there just like screaming and yelling and throwing punches and, yelling at the TV. I just thought that was really bizarre. And it kind of disturbed my young mind. So my initial introduction to professional wrestling was kind of negative, man. I'm just a little kid. I'm trying to sit there and eat supper, and grandma's freaking out, dude. She's freaking out. What the hell? But time marches on. And I don't honestly even remember how it was that I discovered it again. Sometime around the age of 10 or 11, which would be like late 1974, early 1975. Probably because I was watching the Untouchables one day on one day on Channel 6. Channel 6 was the local UHF TV station. The UHF stations, or I'm sorry, actually it wasn't UHF. It was VHF, but it was like the local independent TV station. It didn't have a very strong broadcast signal. It showed lots of reruns and syndicated shows, and you had to really adjust the rabbit ear antennas very precisely to get Channel 6. But Channel 6 had wrestling. More importantly, Channel 6 had the Untouchables. The Untouchables aired every Saturday at 6 p.m. on Channel 6, and I'd watch the Untouchables. Wrestling came on at 7. And so I'm pretty sure that just by watching the Untouchables and leaving the TV on, wrestling would come on, and I would just sort of end up watching it. And I guess by the age of 10, my brain was a little more ready to absorb the information. And I just remember the first wrestlers I ever got into. I remember some of the matches very clearly. There was this one tag team match featuring Rocky Johnson and Tiger Conway Jr. I think they were going up against Bob Roop and Killer Carl Krupp. Awesome. I remember Terry Funk and Dusty Rhodes having a tag team match, I think against Cyclone Negro and somebody else. This was really good stuff. Remember, it's championship wrestling from Florida. We're talking about NWA, baby. Classic NWA. See that? NWA. That's the wrestling logo I grew up with. Championship wrestling from Florida with your host, Gordon Soley, the dean of professional wrestling commentators. It was just pure dumb luck that I happened to have literally in my backyard on my local independent TV station, the greatest wrestling promotion of the 70s ever. Obviously, if you grew up in the Mid-South, or if you grew up in the Mid-Atlantic, or you grew up in California, of course, those were the greatest promotions in the world for you. I'll let you have that. But the fact is, Championship Wrestling from Florida was the best. Best talent, best booking, best storylines, best commentator. And here I am at the ripe young age of 10, just ready to absorb it in. So that was my introduction. I ended up watching wrestling every Saturday at 7. And then I found out that the next day, on Sunday at 1 p.m., the local Spanish station would present reruns of Championship Wrestling from Florida, usually from a few weeks prior. They didn't have the exact same schedule. So I could catch up on a lot of wrestling in one weekend. And just, it's like, how do you explain why does somebody get into something like that? What is it that pushes the button in your brain that makes you fall in love with the characters and the blood and the brawling? I mean, I don't know what it was, but I was hooked. There were certain wrestlers that just completely blew my mind. King Curtis, for example. King Curtis, to this day, I think was one of the most amazing heels who ever lived. And if you know your history and you know your background, you'll know that the great Bruiser Brody himself has admitted on many occasions that he stole a lot from King Curtis. And if you can see clips of King Curtis, you will see a lot of what Bruiser Brody later became. Fantastic. King Curtis was always there with Maniac Mark Lewin. Playboy Gary Hart was a manager. Pac Song. You had the Briscoe brothers, Jack and Jerry Briscoe. Obviously Dusty Rhodes, Dick Murdoch, Paul Jones, the Masked Superstars, the Spoiler, the Assassins. This is like the creme de la creme of 70s professional wrestling, and they all wrestled in Florida. Eddie Graham, Mike Graham, all of them. And then a little bit later on, Steve Kern, you had Blackjack Mulligan coming in. Barry Windham broke into the business when he was a young one. Just fantastic. It was just like the best time and best place to get into professional wrestling. Watching wrestling on TV every week, my old man eventually got into the act. I think he always liked wrestling. He might have even been the one to initially say, hey, leave the TV on, let's watch this wrestling. He saw how into it I was getting. And one day he said, do you want to go see wrestling live in person? I said, yeah. Yeah. I never even really knew that you could do something like that, you know? I mean, watching wrestling on TV, you saw a ring and you saw people watching it, but it never even occurred to me that I could be one of those people. But the old man said, let's go check out wrestling. We'll go see it live. And that was a very exciting proposition. Very exciting. So they had live wrestling on Wednesdays in Florida. And the three main venues were the Miami Beach Convention Center, with occasional shows at Miami-Dade Community College, at the big gymnasium there, and sometimes shows at the Miami High Life Fronton. And the night that we went for the first time ever, my first introduction to professional wrestling live was at the Miami High Life Fronton. The High Life Fronton, I think, was the smallest of the venues where they had wrestling. I think it held maybe 2,000. And so High Life, if y'all don't know High Life, you know High Life is the sport where guys with these weird baskets on their arms throw a ball against a wall and people bet on it. I still don't know what the hell it's supposed to mean, but the fronton is set up to where you've got like a big stage in the front of the room and then seating. It's very much like a concert venue. And in fact, they would use the High Life Fronton for concerts. The bands would set up on the stage and the seating would be in front of the stage. So for wrestling, they would set the ring up on the stage and they would have a limited amount of ringside seating on the stage and then the regular concert style seating in front of the stage. Lucky for us, it was kind of a soft draw that night. The headlining match was King Curtis versus Joe LeDuc. And there wasn't very much setup for this match. They weren't feuding or anything. I remember they only had one TV match to lead up to it where King Curtis got Joe LeDuc tied up in the ropes and Joe LeDuc is hanging there by his leg and King Curtis is chopping him with his taped hand and Joe LeDuc is, bleeding all over the canvas. But that was it. It just had one match on TV the week before to set it up. So it wasn't like a real hot draw. And as I read in the paper the next day, because they would print the results the next day, only like 1,100 people came to the match, which is a very soft house for championship wrestling from Florida. They usually drew like between 5,000 and 6,000. So not many people showed up for this one, which was great because when we got to the box office to buy our tickets, we ended up on the stage like third or fourth row from the ring. And this was real heady stuff, especially when you're a little kid. The ring was like this. It was huge. It was this gigantic ring. And the room itself was huge. It was the biggest room I'd ever been in my life up to that point. This giant-sized room. And even though there was like only 1,100 people there, it was the most people I'd ever seen in one place in my life, except maybe at the circus or something. And when they were screaming and yelling, it was loud. It was real loud. It hurt my ears. They were screaming so loud. It was quite an experience. Quite an experience. Made even more surreal by the fact that there was an empty seat next to me. I was there with me, my youngest brother, and my father. There's an empty seat next to me, and sometime right before the matches began, this guy came in and sat down right next to us. And I looked at him, and I thought, this is Jerry Stubbs sitting next to me. Jerry Stubbs. And I'm like, I'm totally starstruck. Now, of course, Jerry Stubbs in South Florida was a total jobber. They just jobbed him out. He went on later to win titles and become a good card in other promotions. But at this point, in the mid '70s in Florida, they were just jobbing him out. But still, this is a wrestler sitting next to me. I couldn't believe it. I wanted to talk to him. I didn't know how to approach this guy. He was sitting there, not only in apparently a paid seat, but he had a bunch of wrestling magazines with him. He had the latest copy of The Wrestler, the Bill Apter mag. He had all these wrestling magazines with him. So Jerry Stubbs is sitting next to me watching the matches with wrestling magazines. And so I was like looking over at the magazines because I hadn't seen those, And he said, he was like, oh yeah, hey kid, look at that. Latest issue of The Wrestler, pretty cool, huh? I'm like, yeah, you look like Jerry Stubbs. And he just laughed. Didn't even reply to my observation. He was just And so when the matches began, he was like there with all of us watching the matches and getting really into it. And I remember something I will never, ever, ever forget, ever. One of the matches in the mid-card was the Masked Superstars versus Tom Jones and Abe Jacobs. Okay, I'm not going to get into who these people are. If you don't already know, you can find out. Tom Jones and Abe Jacobs versus the Masked Superstars. Okay, and before the match began, Jerry Stubbs said, all right, hey kid, watch what's going to happen in this match. You see that guy, that masked superstar? He's going to lose his mask. They're going to take the mask off of him. And I was like, how do you know? He just said, watch. So the match begins. Tom Jones and Abe Jacobs versus the Masked Superstars. They're going at it, man. Tom Jones, I will never forget him standing on the ring apron under the bright lights. And it was South Florida, it was hot. I was watching the steam come off of his head and the steam come off of his shoulders and the bright green and yellow singlet that he had with the peace sign. And you got to remember, this is huge. This is bigger than life. This is real giant-sized wrestlers in a fucking huge ring with people screaming and yelling and steam and sweat and spit. I mean, smacks and slaps and punches. Wow, this was huge. This was like better than watching it on TV. And the match is going on, and the Masked Superstars are killing Abe Jacobs and Tom Jones, and they're fighting back. And sure enough, right before the match ended, somebody took off the mask of the Masked Superstar. And I didn't know who it was because I didn't know anything about who this was. It was actually Rip Hawk, who was under the hood. And I was like, what? And I looked over at Jerry Stubbs, and he didn't even say anything. He just looked at me like, yep. And my head was spinning at this point. Intermission after that match, I remember one of the undercard guys was Mike George. Mike George was your classic jobber in South Florida. Why he never got over, I don't know. But my younger brother and I, during intermission, went to the snack bar, to get, a big soft pretzel and some soda. And over across on the other side of the snack bar was Mike George talking to a girl. I remember Mike George dressed in his very slick, fancy polyester shirt with a big eleganza collar and his bell-bottom slacks and his stack platform shoes. in his hair, talking to this girl, and he was just, I mean, yeah, he just gotten the tar beaten out of him in the preliminary match, but he looked good. And that girl he was talking to looked pretty good too. And me and my brother were just like, we want to go up and say something to him, but he's talking to a girl. Couldn't interrupt him. Even at that very tender young age, we knew you do not interrupt a dude when he's talking to a girl. You just don't do it, man. Don't do it. So we let him be. We just kind of watched in awe, complete awe. Wow. Intermission's over. Go back and watch the rest of the matches. I'm sure someone's got the card posted somewhere. There's this guy, Scott Teal, who's on Facebook. And he's got a Championship Wrestling from Florida archive page, which has like literally thousands of results and ads from the magazines and from the newspapers and articles. I'm sure that card is out there somewhere. I would love to find it. I don't even remember what the exact date was, but the headliner, definitely Joe LeDuc versus King Curtis. And watching Joe LeDuc versus King Curtis, I mean, if everything that had transpired prior to this was bigger than life, this was bigger than life. Man, oh man, oh man. King Curtis in all his glory. Wrench, wrench, wrench. Stalking around the ring with the hair and the sneer and more scar tissue on his head than anybody I'd ever seen in my life up to that point. I hadn't seen Abdullah prior to that, but King Curtis, give Abdullah a run for the money in the scar tissue department, baby. And Joe LeDuc, he always wrestled as a face, or at least for the time when I was getting into wrestling initially. He always wrestled as a face. He turned heel later, but he was always a face originally. Not very good as a face. He totally lacked personality as a face. As a heel, he was fantastic. Man, he had menace. He had personality galore as a heel. As a face, So there wasn't much setup for the match. Joe LeDuc was not a compelling face. So the draw was kind of soft. King Curtis whipped him good. The 1,100 people screamed and yelled, and then it went home. And this is another one of those moments that you just never, ever forget. Match is over. We get up from our seats. I seem to recall that Jerry Stubbs had already split. So we're walking past the ring to get off the stage and go home. And Joe LeDuc is like right in front of us on the ring apron. And he hops down and he walks right by us. The guy was as big as a house. You just can't understand how big these dudes are until you actually are in proximity to one of them. It's nuts. It's like the one time I saw Andre wrestle. This was a card at Miami-Dade Community College, which was a bigger venue. They might have held like 5,000 there. The headliner was Andre versus Terry Funk for the NWA World Heavyweight Championship, which was a big deal because Andre never wrestled for titles, so Bill Apter said. And Will Tanner says, is this live? Yes, this is live. I'm on 100% live. This is not a broadcast. This is for real. On my end here, it looks okay. I'm not breaking up. There's no problems. Dennis down in Mobile says he's having some problems, but hey, it's the internet. What can I tell you? Some people get breakup. Some people get perfect reception. The only problem is there are no rabbit ears to adjust. There is no UHF dial to gently twist. I wish there were, but there isn't. So this is a good excuse for you to go to the YouTube channel, baby. If you're having problems watching now, go to the ANTiSEEN YouTube channel and watch it in uninterrupted perfection. That's my hot tip for you today. You won't regret it. Just do it, man. Just do it. Anyway, Miami-Dade Community College, Andre versus Terry Funk for the NWA World Heavyweight title. I remember on the bill, on the undercard, was Bob Orton Sr., who was a very dangerous looking fellow. He went up against a guy named Ali Pasha. And Mike Graham had some very funny stories to tell about Ali Pasha. But Ali Pasha was the first steroid monster I'd ever seen, with the exception of Superstar Billy Graham. But I had only ever seen Superstar Billy Graham in the Bill Apter magazines. Seeing this dude Ali Pasha with the roid muscles in person was very impressive. And watching a dangerous old vet like Bob Orton Sr. go up against this guy was also cool. You know, Bob Orton Sr., the Big O, the father of Bob Orton Jr., he had the flat top buzz cut. His face looked like an old wallet. You know, his body looked like a bag of broken doorknobs. But you could tell this is not a guy to mess with. So yeah, Bob Orton Sr., this dude Ali Pasha. Don't remember a whole lot, but Andre versus Terry Funk for the NWA World Heavyweight title. I knew that I had to see Andre up close. So right before the match began, I bolted from my seat and ran down to ringside. And sure enough, here comes Andre. It's another one of those things you just never forget. Andre walked by me. My eyes were at waist level for him. I remember watching the waistband of his trunks walk by. It was like I was laughing again. It was ridiculous and massive. And, you know, the match itself was whatever it was. Obviously, Andre wasn't going to get the title because, as somebody pointed out there, Will Tanner, Andre was not a title guy. He wasn't going to win a title and stay in any one territory. He was a world traveler who was booked for one-shots here and there. He wasn't going to win a title. And sure enough, somehow it ended up that Terry Funk threw him over the top rope, got disqualified, end of match. But I saw Andre, dudes. It was cool. It was impressive. It was a big deal. I stayed a fan of wrestling, an avid fan of wrestling, until about 1981, when I was about in the 11th grade. In 1981, I was just like so into punk rock and new wave and comic books that wrestling, I kind of started to outgrow it, if you will. The last professional wrestling I watched from Florida was when Bugsy McGraw came into the territory. And I loved him because his raps were so completely nuts. Who are you? Are you the plastic person that you see, gazing back at you from the mirror as you work your mediocre job in an office building to make money? I mean, he would go on like that. Bugsy McGraw was awesome. Ironically enough, this was right around the time that Kevin Sullivan began his Abu-Dhabi demon angle. And I thought it was corny. I thought it was the silliest, dumbest thing I'd ever seen in my life. I thought Kevin Sullivan doing the whole shtick with the face paint and the snake, I thought it was just goofy. And, you know, at the same time, you had the Blackjack Mulligan, Dusty Rhodes family angle going up against James J. Dillon and his stable. And Kevin Sullivan was involved with all that. I just thought it was silly. I just thought it was dumb. By that time, I'd had quite enough of the Dusty finish. Like, I already knew that if Dusty was in a big main headlining match, that he was going to get the shit beat out of him and be left a bloody pulp. His tag team partner was going to betray him. He wasn't going to win the belt. It was going to be a screw job. It was getting really predictable. So I was like just kind of burnt out on the whole thing. And I stopped following wrestling right around then. And stayed out of it for a very long time, because this is when, a couple years after that is when this chump, the man unaffectionately known as the Orange Clown, and his puppet master, the man who I will only call Junior, turned professional wrestling into sports entertainment. Sports entertainment. Sports entertainment. Kiss my butt! I was watching late night TV when this fool, Bulk Brogan, or whatever the hell his name is, went on TV late at night and was being interviewed by whatever schlub it was behind the desk, Johnny Carson or Jay Letterman or Larry Lino or whoever. I don't keep track of these people. I don't know who they are. I don't give a good goddamn. But there he is, the chumpster himself, Bulk Brogan, looked that camera dead in the eye on nationwide TV and said, "Folks, it's just entertainment." I was like, fuck you, chump. It was one thing to have Jerry Stubbs sit next to me and tell me what was going to happen in the match before it happened. Okay. It was something else to have seen with my own two eyes Terry Funk throw Andre over the top rope, but then later in the Bill Apter magazine read that Andre threw Funk over the top rope. Okay, that was kind of a test. It was a test to be watching TV and see Frank the Hammer Goodish. And if you don't know who Frank the Hammer Goodish is, I'm not going to tell you. You better find out. To see Frank the Hammer Goodish be on the receiving end of a flying drop kick, which missed him by about yay far, and sell it, ooh, go flying across the ring. All right, that was enough to make you wonder a little bit, maybe. Not enough to shake my fundamental belief in professional wrestling. But to have this dumbass performer go on nationwide TV and say, "It's just entertainment, folks." Ooh, burn me up. It still burns me up. It makes me pull out what little hair I have left and want to throw it at somebody. God damn, you see this? That's from pure frustration. Pure frustration over what this moron did to professional wrestling, and of course everything else there is to deal with in the world. Whatever, I'm just saying. I'm mildly frustrated sometimes. I'll get over it, don't worry, it's okay. It's fine. I just need a drink of cool Danbury tap water. Anyway, that was enough to make me stay out of wrestling for a long time. Until one day, I was at my record store, Trash American Style, in Danbury, Connecticut. Of course, you can look up Trash American Style on Discogs. That's where I sell my records. Just saying. So one day, I was standing behind the counter at Trash American Style, and a customer was hanging out there on a Saturday. Will Tanner, the gallon jug's too awkward for TV. That's why I've got the space age stainless steel thermal container made out of an exciting metallic polymer for my TV. But thanks for noticing. Anyway, this guy's name was Paul Benoit, and Paul was a real cool guy. And somehow, the topic turned to wrestling, because he was a huge wrestling fan. And it came up somehow. We were talking about it, and I was saying, yeah, wrestling, I liked it when I was a kid, but, this WWF stuff is just jive. He said, yeah, I know, it's total jive, but there's a promotion, there's a new promotion that you need to check out. It's called Eastern Championship Wrestling. And it's really cool. I guarantee you'll love it. I was like, all right, whatever. Just sort of put it in the trap. Kind of forgot about it, but then a couple weeks later he said, dude, remember I told you about this Eastern Championship Wrestling? They're having a show over in Poughkeepsie in a couple of weeks. Why don't you? I'm going to go. Why don't you come along? I was like, sure, why not? Let's go see some wrestling. Paul's a cool guy, even though it's going to suck. I'll hang out with this dude for an afternoon, and we'll go to beautiful Poughkeepsie on a Saturday afternoon. Why not? So, we drive to Poughkeepsie, and we get to the venue. I think it was the Poughkeepsie Raceway, and at the raceway, they had one of those events sheds. The kind I'm talking about, a big metal shed. We pay our $8 or $9 to get in. There's the ring. And around the ring is like maybe 3 rows of folding chairs. And that's it. In this shed. Now remember, I'd gone to see professional wrestling at the Miami High Life Fronton with, the Miami-Dade Community College. The regular matches were held at the Miami Beach Convention Center. We're talking about thousands of people. Even on a soft night, remember, there were still 1,100 people there. This was a giant metal shed. Probably in total about the size of your average suburban home, with 3 rows of folding wooden chairs around the ring. I was like, man, this is some rinky-dink shit. Whatever, we're here. Assigned seating? Just take a seat anywhere you want. Okay, fine. So we're hanging out, we're talking, we're waiting for the matches to begin, and whatever. First match. This guy comes out to the ring, huge monster of a dude, 911. And out comes the challenger, a scrawny little runt named Mikey Whipwreck. And, neither of these guys were just like wrestlers, It's like 911 had this kind of like biker vest and black sweats and boots and whatnot. And Mikey Whipwreck, I think, had like a hockey jersey and these big old oversized shorts and these ridiculously big knee pads. I'm like, oh man, I knew this was going to be Mickey Mouse. I just knew it. These guys look like jerks. Ring the bell. Match begins. Basically, 911 just walks over to Mikey Whipwreck, grabs him by the throat, and choke slams him. And Mikey is out. He's dead. He's dead. I thought, okay. So 911 walks over and picks him up by the throat again, and lifts him up over his head and choke slams him again. Boom! And Mikey bounces off the mat, lands again. He might have quivered once or twice, but he's fucking dead. He's just a heap. So what happens next? 911 walks over to him again, grabs him by the throat, picks him up off the mat, and choke slams him again. By now, I'm cracking up. It was the funniest thing I'd ever seen in my life. At the end, 911's disqualified, so they raise Mikey's hand in victory, and he's dead. He's on the canvas in a coma, and they raise his hand in victory and let it flop down afterwards. Man, hilarious. And they get the stretcher, and they stretcher him out, the winner of the match. They stretcher him out, and 911 steps over the ropes and leaves. This is when I started to think that maybe there was something to this ECW stuff. So, the card goes on. Last match before the intermission is Public Enemy versus the Bruise Brothers. And this is when I really started to think that something was going on, because this was when the match spilled outside the ring. And these guys are brawling in, I would say the stands, but there weren't any stands, brawling in the 100 or so wooden chairs. But they're wading through the chairs, and chairs are flying, and the Bruise Brothers smashing guys against the Coke machine and into the wall, and people have to run out of the way. And it's like, if you wanted to, you could go right up to them and watch them brawl right in your face, I mean, you didn't get this at the Miami High Life, Ronton. This stuff was immediate, man. This was immediate. And they just like went all over the room, and then occasionally went back into the ring, and it was wild, man. It was wild. So now I'm starting to see what old Paul Benoit was talking about, man. This was a whole different thing. Intermission time. Excuse me. This was almost a replay of what it was like at my first card ever at the Miami High Life, Ronton. Because we're just kind of hanging around, they didn't really have concessions. They had the soda machine that somehow didn't get wrecked during the brawl. So, you get a Pepsi or whatever and kind of hang out. But the wrestlers were all just kind of hanging out too, and talking to people. This wasn't Mike George trying to chat up some girl. This was the wrestlers themselves. They were just kind of there, and in the 70s and 80s, that just did not happen. It did not happen. The wrestlers did not mingle with the customers. It just didn't happen. But there's Cactus Jack. And I didn't know who Cactus Jack was. I didn't know who any of these people were. This is my first time ever. So there's Cactus Jack just hanging out talking to a bunch of people. So I figured I'd go over and see what's up, see who this dude is. And he was like, yeah, I know. I'm really sorry. I was supposed to wrestle tonight, but I threw my back out last night, and I just can't do it. But, I wanted to come out and, say hi to everybody and support the boys. And he was signing autographs, and he was just hanging out and talking to people like a normal guy. So I was like, I better get an autograph. So I got an autograph. Still got it to this day. And it was just like, this is a whole different thing. And the headlining, I believe that the main event was supposed to be Cactus Jack versus Sabu. But since Jack had thrown his back out, it ended up being Terry and Dory Funk Jr. versus Sabu and somebody else. I don't remember. And I know for a fact that there is a website that's got all the ECW results with the exact date and the card. I've seen it. So I don't remember, but luckily the mainframe electronic brain can remember for me. But anyway, here's Terry Funk. I hadn't seen him wrestle since 1976. That's pretty cool. And Dory Funk Jr., who I'd never seen wrestle. And of course, Sabu. Oh man, seeing Sabu for the first time live? Forget it, dude. Words don't do it justice. At one point, they ended up brawling under the ring. And the ring's going up and down. It looks like it's going to fall apart, I mean, this ECW stuff was pretty damn cool. And that began a hardcore, no pun intended, love affair between me and ECW, which lasted for quite a while. And that's when I'm going to stop talking, because my voice is giving out, and my relationship with ECW would require an entire broadcast itself. So we're going to quit now, kids. We'll just wrap it up by saying that I would fully expect that Jeff Clayton will be back on live next Tuesday at 5 p.m. for Break On Through. If you want to hear me yammer some more, I go live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. for my show, which is called Tent Talks Tunes. And I mostly talk about records and music and my history in the music business and people I've met and bands I've played with and records I love and just all kinds of wacky, crazy stuff. So if you want to check that out, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. on Facebook. And I've got my own YouTube channel as well, Malcolm Tent. Don't forget, if you're trying to order off of ANTiSEEN.com or through the Janice Blythe Facebook page, If you're using your cell phone, it's kind of glitchy right now, so just stick to the tablet and or the desktop. We're working on it. PayPal's got some problems. We filed the various complaints. We're going to try to get them to fix it on their end. So it can be done. You just got to use your desktop or a tablet or some such thing. And of course, coming sooner than later, the official Mad Brother Ward and Malcolm Tent power duo, Sonic Sauna cassette. So yeah, man, I'll finish telling my tales about professional wrestling at some point. Don't know when. It'll happen. You'll hear about it. So tune in next week for Jeff Clayton and Break On Through. And Lord willing, and the creeks don't rise, you will be seeing ANTiSEEN on a stage. We don't know where. We don't know when. But let me tell you, brothers and sisters, we ain't stopping. We're not stopping, baby. This new normal does not put a brake on the death train. The death train rolls on. And that is that. I'm out of here, kids. Until we meet again, this is Malcolm Tent saying so long on the Nutmeg State.